There was a prophet in Israel whose name carried weight across the kingdom, Elisha. Kings sent messengers to his door. Generals crossed borders seeking his help. Widows clung to hope because of stories they had heard about him. He turned bitter water sweet with a bowl of salt. He multiplied a single jar of oil until debts were erased and futures restored. He healed a foreign commander of a disease no army could conquer. He struck entire enemy forces with blindness and led them helpless into Israel's hands. And when death itself came knocking, he prayed, and life returned. Miracle after miracle, year after year, the question grew louder. What kind of man carries this much of God's presence? But the most haunting part of Elisha's story didn't happen while he was alive. It happened after. He had been dead for years, his body buried, his tomb sealed and silent. Then one day, in the chaos of a hurried funeral, a corpse was thrown into that same grave. The moment flesh touched those ancient bones, death released its grip. The man's eyes opened. His chest rose. He stood, alive again, in the darkness of a tomb. How does God's power cling to someone so completely that even death cannot wash it away? This is the story of Elisha, a journey that started in an ordinary field, on an ordinary day, with a man who had no idea everything was about to change. Elisha's story begins in the soil. The kind of soil that clings to your hands, settles under your nails, and reminds you that life is often shaped in places where no one is watching. He was guiding the 12th yoke of oxen, a sign of a hard-working family, not a wealthy one, steadily carving paths across the field. The rhythm of the day was simple, familiar, predictable, and that is precisely when God tends to move. Elijah approached without announcement, without trumpet or command. He simply placed his mantle, the symbol of prophetic authority, across Elisha's shoulders. A mantle, resting for a moment, then lifted again. The moment carried its own weight, heaven speaking through fabric and touch. Yet the significance of that brief contact changed everything. Elisha knew it instantly. A divine calling often arrives in a whisper, not a spectacle. He left the plow behind and ran after Elijah. The words he spoke were not of hesitation, but of honor, a request to bid farewell to his parents before stepping into a life he could not fully understand. Elijah's answer carried both freedom and challenge, an invitation to choose without pressure, but also without excuses. Elisha returned home only long enough to make a statement that would resonate for generations to come. He dismantled the plow, the very tool of his livelihood, and used its wood to build a fire. He prepared the oxen as a meal for his community, a final act of generosity before stepping into the unknown. It was more than a farewell. It was a declaration that there would be no turning back. A life once grounded in the fields would now be shaped by the voice of God. Then, with the fire behind him and the mantle ahead of him, Elisha followed Elijah as a servant, walking behind a man whose footsteps would train his own heart for what lay ahead. What he could not see in that moment was that this simple obedience was the beginning of a path that would one day open rivers, confront kings, restore life, and reveal the unseen armies of heaven. Elisha did not know how long he would walk beside Elijah, but every day with the prophet had formed something deep within him, a steadiness, a sensitivity to God's movements, an understanding that divine assignments often unfold in ways the human mind cannot predict. And then came the day when everything felt different. Elijah's steps were slower, his voice quieter, as if he carried a secret the earth itself was waiting to hear. They began in Gilgal, a place of beginnings, where Elijah turned to him and said, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me on." It sounded gentle, almost protective, like a father shielding a son from coming pain. But Elisha would not let distance separate what God had joined. He answered with a resolve shaped through years of service. He would not leave Elijah's side, especially now when the air itself felt charged with expectation. So they walked together to Bethel, where the sons of the prophets approached Elisha with whispers, "Do you know the Lord will take your master from you today?" Their words carried curiosity, but Elisha carried reverence. He acknowledged them only briefly. Some moments are too sacred to dissect. Some transitions are too holy to treat lightly. Again, Elijah urged him to stay behind. Again, Elisha refused to let go. At Jericho, the same scene repeated: the quiet request to remain, the firm refusal to part. Loyalty had become the language between them, spoken through footsteps and silence. Finally, they reached the Jordan. Elijah folded his mantle and struck the waters, and the river obeyed, pulling back as if recognizing the authority God had placed upon him. They crossed on dry ground, just as Israel once had under Joshua. And there, on the far side of the river, Elijah stopped. The journey had reached its final steps. "What shall I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elijah asked. Elisha did not speak of safety, or legacy, or influence. He asked for something that revealed his heart more than any miracle he would ever perform, a double portion of Elijah's spirit. It was readiness speaking. He understood that the road ahead would be heavy, and he desired the strength to carry it. Elijah's answer was tender and solemn. If Elisha could see him when he was taken, the request would be granted. What neither of them said aloud was the truth standing quietly between them. The next moments would shape the future of a nation. They walked a little farther, speaking softly, as if each word was part of a farewell neither knew how to voice. The wind felt different on that side of the Jordan, warmer, heavier, almost watchful. Then, without warning, the air began to tremble. A sound neither of them had heard before moved toward them, something too alive to be wind and too fierce to be thunder. A blaze of glory tore through the horizon. A chariot of fire, pulled by horses of fire, descended between them with a force that shook the ground. Flames moved like living light, not consuming the earth beneath them, yet carrying a presence that made even silence feel holy. It was the arrival of the heavenly host, sent for one man. Elisha staggered back as the chariot separated him from Elijah. His heart pounded with awe, deep, reverent awe that shook him to his core. Elijah was lifted toward the heavens in a whirlwind, his figure rising through light and flame, carried by power no human eye can fully comprehend. And in that moment, Elisha cried out with words that came from the depths of his spirit, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." He watched until he could see no more. The wind calmed, the fire faded, the sky returned to its stillness. But at Elisha's feet lay the mantle, the same mantle Elijah had once placed on his shoulders in a quiet field on an ordinary day. Elisha tore his garments as a sign of the grief that comes when a great chapter closes. Then he picked up the mantle. The fabric was familiar, yet now it felt heavier, charged with responsibility and promise. He walked back toward the Jordan, the waters rushing before him. Holding the mantle high, he struck the river and spoke the words that would define the rest of his life. "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The river answered first. It divided without hesitation, opening a path for him to cross. And from a distance the sons of the prophets saw it and understood. The spirit that had rested on Elijah now rested on Elisha. A new prophet had risen, and heaven had made it unmistakably clear. When Elisha returned across the Jordan, the sons of the prophets met him with a mixture of reverence and uncertainty. They had watched the river open under his command, yet their hearts still wrestled with the absence of Elijah. For years, the older prophet had been a pillar among them, and now They stood face to face with the man who would carry the mantle forward. Elisha did not try to prove anything. He simply walked with the quiet steadiness of someone entrusted with a task greater than himself. Soon after, messengers from Jericho approached him. Their city was beautifully situated, surrounded by fertile land and strong walls, but beneath its beauty lay a problem that had shaped daily life for years. The water source was corrupted. It caused sickness, robbed the soil of its strength, and turned hope into a constant struggle. Even in a prosperous place, people lived with a quiet fear of what their own water might do to them. They spoke to Elisha with both respect and desperation. He listened as someone who understood the weight of their suffering. Then he asked them for something unusual, a new bowl filled with salt. They brought it at once, unsure of what he intended, but trusting the authority God had placed on him. Elisha walked to the spring itself, the heart of their need. He poured the salt into the source and declared, "This is what the Lord says. I have healed this water. It will no longer bring harm or death." And from that day, the spring flowed with purity. The miracle extended beyond the water. It carried the assurance that God still moved among his people, restoring what had been broken and breathing life into places long marked by struggle. Not long after healing the waters of Jericho, Elisha traveled toward Bethel, a place where spiritual compromise had shaped the culture for generations. It was a region marked by the influence of idolatry, where reverence for God had been slowly replaced by attitudes that treated holy things as trivial. As Elisha approached the outskirts of the town, a group of young men came out to confront him. The scripture describes them using a term that refers to youths or young men, not small children, people already shaped by the spirit of their environment, disrespectful, hardened, and eager to mock anything that represented God's authority. Their words were not simple insults. They carried a deeper meaning, a rejection of the prophetic office itself. They taunted him, shouting, "Go up, you bald man! Go up!" echoing the event of Elijah's ascension, as if to say, if Elijah was truly taken by God, why are you still here? Why don't you disappear as well? It was more than mockery. It was contempt for the God who had raised Elijah and now commissioned Elisha. Elisha stopped. The road fell quiet around him. This moment touched something deeper than personal offense. It revealed a spiritual sickness that ran through the town, a defiance that had taken root over years of turning away from God. He turned toward them and spoke a curse in the name of the Lord, an act of divine justice. What followed was swift and sobering. 2 bears emerged from the nearby woods and scattered the group, leaving them with a terrifying reminder that mocking God's voice carries consequences. News of the event spread quickly as a warning that the presence of God is not something to treat lightly. Bethel had been shaken awake, and Elisha continued on his journey, carrying a mantle that demanded both compassion and courage, knowing that every step he took would reveal the character of the God he served. Among the people who sought Elisha, one woman came with a kind of quiet desperation that is hard to put into words. She was a widow of a man who had once feared the Lord, a man who had walked with the prophets. But death had visited her home, and with it came the crushing weight of debt. In her anguish, she faced a threat that would break any parent. The creditor was coming to take her 2 sons as servants. Her home was filled with memories, yet empty of options. And so she came to Elisha with the honesty of a heart on the edge. Elisha listened with a gentleness that made room for her pain. Then he asked a question that reached deeper than her circumstances. "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" She hesitated at first. Scarcity has a way of making even small things feel insignificant. Finally, she answered that she had nothing but a small jar of oil. To her it seemed useless. To God, it was more than enough. Elisha told her to borrow as many empty vessels as she could, to go inside her home with her sons, close the door, and pour out the oil. Just a simple act of faith carried out behind a closed door where only God could see. She began to pour, and the oil flowed. Vessel after vessel filled, and still it did not stop. Her sons brought more containers, each one receiving what none of them could have produced on their own. When the last vessel was finally full, the oil ceased, perfectly timed, with nothing wasted. Elisha told her to sell the oil, pay her debts, and live on the rest. What had started as a plea for survival became a testimony of provision. In a world where resources often feel small and fear feels large, this miracle whispered a truth Israel needed to remember. God does not need abundance to act. He asks only for willingness. And sometimes behind the simplest obedience lies a future restored, one vessel at a time. As Elisha continued traveling through the northern regions, one household began to stand out, marked by the unusual kindness that flowed from it. In the town of Shunem lived a woman of discernment, someone who recognized the presence of God through the quiet authority Elisha carried. Whenever he passed through, she insisted he stop and share a meal. Over time, her hospitality deepened into something more intentional. She spoke to her husband and proposed building a small upper room for Elisha, a place with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. It was a simple space, yet it carried the quiet honor of a heart that valued the things of God. Elisha felt the sincerity of her generosity and wanted to bless her in return. When he learned she had no child and that her husband was aging, he called her to the doorway of the room she had built and spoke a promise she had long ago stopped hoping to hear. Within a year, she would hold a son in her arms. Her breath caught somewhere between longing and fear. Hope, once buried, can feel dangerous when it begins to rise again. But God was faithful. The child was born just as Elisha had declared. Years later, the laughter in that home was silenced in an instant. The boy collapsed in the field while working with his father and died soon after. Grief does something strange to time. Hours stretch into forever, and memories become sharper than reality. But the woman did not surrender to despair. She carried her son to the prophet's room, laid him on the bed where Elisha once rested, and set out to find him. When she reached Elisha, her voice trembled, but her faith did not break. She held on to the prophet with a determination born from love and trust. Elisha returned with her to Shunem, went into the room alone, and prayed. He stretched himself over the child, and warmth returned to the boy's lifeless body. Breath followed, movement followed, life returned. The woman fell at Elisha's feet, overwhelmed by the mercy of God. Her son was restored because she believed the God who sees beyond walls and hears beyond whispers. In her story, Israel witnessed a truth carried quietly through generations. The God who gives life does not abandon what he has given. Far to the north, in the kingdom of Aram, lived a man whose name stirred both admiration and fear. Naaman was a commander of armies, a man celebrated for victories that shaped nations. Soldiers followed him without hesitation. Kings trusted him without question. His armor carried stories of triumph, and his presence commanded respect wherever he walked. But beneath that armor, hidden from public eyes and political power, lived a quiet truth that threatened everything he had built. Naaman suffered from leprosy. No strategy could conquer it. No reputation could shield him from it. Even the strongest men discover moments when human strength reaches its limit. In his household lived a young Israelite girl, taken captive during a raid. She had every reason to resent the place she now called home, yet compassion shaped her words. She told Naaman's wife that a prophet in Samaria could bring healing. Her voice could have been ignored, but hope has a way of speaking through unlikely people. And when suffering silences pride, even generals learn to listen. Naaman traveled to Israel with gifts fit for royalty, expecting a ceremony worthy of his status. Instead, Elisha did not even come to the door. He sent a message. Naaman was to wash in the Jordan River 7 times. The instruction felt beneath him. The rivers of his own land were clearer, grander, more dignified. Why should a commander, accustomed to honor, submit to something so simple? He turned away in anger, but his servants, men who had walked beside him through battle and hardship, urged him to reconsider. They understood something Naaman had not yet learned. Obedience often opens doors, strength cannot. Reluctantly, Naaman stepped into the Jordan. The water was ordinary. The moment felt unimpressive, but as he immersed himself again and again, something shifted. On the 7th time, he rose from the river with skin restored, smooth as that of a child. The disease that had claimed his future released him. Overwhelmed, Naaman returned to Elisha, no longer as a commander seeking recognition, but as a humbled man acknowledging the God of Israel. He offered gifts Elisha refused, for this healing did not come from human hands. Naaman asked for soil from Israel to take home, a physical reminder that he would worship the Lord from that day forward, even in a land surrounded by other gods. His transformation went beyond the cleansing of his skin. It reached into the reorientation of his heart. In Naaman's story, Israel saw a truth they often struggled to embrace. God's compassion reaches across borders, and his power touches even those who once stood as enemies. Near the banks of the Jordan, a group of young prophets gathered around a growing concern. Their dwelling had become too small, and they longed to build a place that could hold the expanding community God was raising through the ministry of Elisha. It was simply a group of faithful men trying to create space to learn, to pray, and to serve. Yet even here, far from palaces and battlefields, God would reveal a truth many overlook. As they cut down trees, the sound of axes striking wood echoed through the valley. Then suddenly, a cry rose from the river. One of the young men had swung his axe, and the iron head flew from the handle, disappearing beneath the water. In that moment, his concern went beyond the tool itself. It was borrowed. Losing it meant shame, debt, and the kind of stress that can consume a humble worker's heart. He ran to Elisha, not embarrassed to admit his worry, and Elisha, who had seen chariots of fire, who had raised the dead, who had purified poisoned stew and healed foreign generals, listened to this young man with the same seriousness he offered to kings. Because nothing is small in the hands of God. Elisha asked where the axe head had fallen. The young prophet pointed to the water, murky and still. There was no logical solution in sight. Iron sinks, it doesn't float. But Elisha cut a piece of wood, tossed it into the river, and as it touched the surface, the impossible took place. The iron rose. The young man reached out and took it from the water, stunned by a miracle that seemed almost gentle in its simplicity. A lost tool restored, a burden lifted, a quiet reminder that the God who parts seas and raises nations also steps into the daily concerns of ordinary people. This moment did not reshape kingdoms or redraw borders, but it shaped the hearts of the sons of the prophets. It taught them that God's presence was with them in the small frustrations, the everyday failures, the places where people feel unseen. The floating axe head carried a revelation that whispered to every generation that followed. You are seen. Your struggles matter, and the God who works wonders on the battlefield also walks beside you in the quiet places, ready to lift what has sunk beneath the surface of your life. The sun had barely risen when fear swept through the small city of Dothan. Horses snorted in the distance. Metal struck metal. The earth trembled under the weight of a foreign army encircling the hills. The Syrians had come with one mission: capture the prophet Elisha, the man who seemed to know their plans before they were spoken. Inside the house, Elisha's servant peered out the window and froze. Soldiers stretched across the horizon like a dark tide, spears, shields, chariots, an overwhelming force. Panic rose in his chest as he ran to Elisha. "My master, what are we going to do?" His voice trembled, his hands shook. In his mind, this was the end. They were outnumbered, outmatched, surrounded, and alone. But Elisha did not rise in alarm. He did not rush to the door or prepare an escape. He simply looked at his servant with a calmness that felt almost unnatural. "Do not be afraid," he said softly, "for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." To the servant, the words made no sense. More? Where? All he could see was danger closing in, and Elisha's peace felt almost impossible to grasp. Then Elisha prayed, "Lord, open his eyes so that he may see." The room fell quiet. Something shifted, like a veil lifting. The servant blinked and looked again, and what he saw shattered every fear he held. The mountains surrounding Dothan were ablaze with heavenly fire. Horses and chariots of flame stood in ranks beyond counting. Angels formed a wall around the city, glowing with the brilliance of another world. The army of Syria suddenly looked small, tiny next to the strength that had always been there, invisible until God revealed it. The servant gasped, his fear drained away, replaced by awe. Elisha prayed again, this time for the enemy, "Strike them with blindness." In an instant, confusion swept through the Syrian ranks. Their eyes opened, yet they could not see. They stumbled, disoriented, unable to recognize the man they had come to seize. Elisha walked out to them, unafraid. He guided the entire army to Samaria, straight into the hands of Israel. The king, startled by the sudden arrival of thousands of confused soldiers, asked whether he should destroy them. But Elisha shook his head. "No, feed them, give them water, send them back." Mercy, not retaliation, would speak louder. And when the Syrians returned home, they did not attack again for a long time. The victory at Dothan was won by sight, true sight. The kind that looks beyond circumstances, beyond fear, beyond what eyes alone can perceive, because faith often begins where earthly vision ends. And sometimes the greatest battles of your life are won by remembering that you are never surrounded by the enemy. You are surrounded by God. Years passed, kingdoms shifted, kings rose and fell, and the once young prophet who had walked behind Elijah's mantle grew old. Elisha's steps slowed, but his spirit never dimmed. Even as his body weakened, the memory of miracles followed him like a quiet shadow. The boy restored to life, the purified waters, the healed commander, the invisible army. All of it whispered of a God who moved through him with power and mercy. Eventually the day came when Elisha took to his bed, no longer able to travel the dusty paths of Israel. A king visited him, one who still believed that when prophets speak, heaven listens. But no miracle came that day. His journey was reaching its final breath. And then, silence. Elisha died. The man who had carried God's power in every season of his life was lowered into a tomb. The story should have ended there. But the God who called Elisha on an ordinary day in the fields had something else in mind. Sometime after his burial, a band of raiders crossed into Israel during harvest season. Their attacks were sudden and brutal, leaving cities trembling. One afternoon, a group of Israelites were hastily burying a man when they saw the raiders approaching. Terrified, they abandoned the ceremony and threw the dead man into the nearest tomb. It was Elisha's tomb. The moment the man's body touched Elisha's bones, life surged back into him. Breath filled his lungs. His eyes opened. He stood to his feet, alive, restored, awakened by the lingering overflow of the power of God. There was no prophet standing over him, no prayer spoken, no command issued, just the touch of bones once carried by a man who walked so closely with God that even death could not erase the imprint. This final miracle pointed to something far greater than Elisha himself. It revealed a truth Israel needed then, and we still need now. God's power extends beyond human limits. His faithfulness does not die when his servants do. His presence moves beyond what the world calls final. Elisha's tomb declared a message long before another tomb in Jerusalem would one day stand empty. The living God reigns over death itself. And just as Elisha's life had been a channel of miracles, his final testimony became a promise. God can bring life where everything seems lost. He can raise what has fallen. He can breathe again into what the world has already buried. Even in the silence of a tomb, heaven is not finished. Elisha's story does not fade quietly into history. It lingers like a steady flame, shaped by obedience, sharpened through trials, strengthened by faith, and crowned by a legacy that outlived his own heartbeat. His journey began behind a plow and ended with a miracle that broke the natural order. Between those bookends lies a portrait of a life fully surrendered to God. Bold enough to ask for a double portion, humble enough to serve without conditions, tender enough to care for the forgotten, and fearless enough to confront the powerful. Elisha never sought greatness, he sought God, and because of that, his life became a canvas where heaven painted wonders. The plow abandoned in the field reminds us that calling often interrupts comfort. The waters of the Jordan tell us that God makes a way where none exists. The purified spring of Jericho whispers that what is bitter can become whole again. The oil that never stopped flowing teaches that God multiplies what we offer him. The Shunammite's restored sun reveals that faith can reach where human strength cannot. The floating axe head shows that no need is too small for his care. The army of fire surrounding Dothan reminds us that unseen help stands where fear tries to rule. And the man who rose when he touched Elisha's bones tells us that God's power is not limited by human endings. Every miracle speaks of God's nearness to his people. And now the question turns toward each of us. What would your life look like if you believed, truly believed, that the same God who stood with Elisha stands with you? What fear would loosen its grip? What burden would feel lighter? What unanswered prayer would you dare to bring before him again? Elisha's story invites us to something deeper than admiration. It calls us into imitation, following his posture, his availability, his willingness to say yes to God before knowing where the path would lead. Your own story with God is not finished. There are pages yet unwritten, moments yet unseen, answers yet unfolding. Perhaps God has been whispering to you the same invitation he once spoke through a falling mantle. Follow me, trust me, walk with me. If Elisha's life has stirred something in your heart, faith, curiosity, questions, a renewed desire to walk closer with God, then stay with this community. We explore these stories because they anchor us, shape us, and remind us that God still moves in ways we cannot always explain, but can always trust. Before you go, share in the comments. Which moment in Elisha's journey spoke to you the most tonight? And if this story awakened a hunger for deeper understanding, for courage, for clarity, there is more waiting, much more. I'll meet you in the next video. Until then, may the God who walked with Elisha walk with you in every step you take.